Good morning, and thanks for attending this week's second Senstar e-seminar. This session is going to be how to use Adobe Acrobat Reader for site planning. So my name is Todd Breezewell. I'm one of the product managers at Senstar, which is a world leader in video management and perimeter intrusion detection solutions. So with me, but of course remotely due to the COVID-19 thing, I've got Stuart Dewar, another product manager at Senstar, who will be helping as a moderator for this session. So let's just jump in. So as a contractor, integrator, A&E, or whatever, we often find ourselves needing to quickly mark up some site drawings for preliminary work or estimates, which basically means typically walking over to your engineer's desk, asking him to quickly mark something up using his CAD program. Now, in today's COVID-19 world, we kind of find ourselves and our colleagues are all working from home, and access to that same engineer isn't quite as easy as it used to be. Now, if only we could do it ourselves in a professional looking manner, it could save time, resources, and be more effective in our job. So welcome to my webinar goal for the day. Here's an example of a site that my customer provided me, and basically looking to get my input on perimeter and possibly recommend some sort of perimeter security solution. So my engineer isn't accessible, but I have all kinds of information that I'd like to add to this drawing, and it's all in my head, and it looks great. But after I get a fresh printout and start marking it up with my pencil and paper at my desk, I'm certain the accuracy is a little bit lost, and it certainly doesn't look as good and professional as it did in my head. And this is where this presentation is going to help us get to. We'll end up getting to something a little bit more professional, such as this, instead of what we can all do at our desk with our pencils and pens. So from an agenda perspective, we're going to touch on pros and cons of using the CAD software. We're going to look at why Adobe Reader is kind of a great choice to use. And of course, where do I get this Adobe Reader? And then we'll look at some of the basic markup features that this program provides, as well as measurement and dimension features, and then using stamps and copy-paste images into that drawing so that again, it looks as professional as can be, and adding more value for yourself as well as to your customers or colleagues that are referring to this particular document. So pros and cons to using CAD software. I know we all have our engineers in-house and they all have access to some form of CAD software typically, and that could be anything from Autodesk to a multitude of other software that are available on the market. Now the pros, they're great. They're very feature rich. There's all kinds of stuff in these programs that allow you to do all kinds of crazy, wonderful things to your drawing. You've also got the ability to modify the actual layout itself. So not only adding layers of dimensions and comments and whatnot, you can actually modify the layout, the site plan that was provided to you in that original PDF. But we've of course got cons that are associated with that. It's expensive. We're looking at about, let's say AutoCAD probably runs around $2,000 US per year for a license. So it gets quite expensive. Not to mention, because it's so feature rich, we get a huge steep learning curve to cross over. So when you're looking at doing simple markups, it's way more complicated than it needs to be. And at the end of the day, you're not the CAD guy. You don't have that software. You don't know how to use it. In order to learn it, it's going to take you an exorbitant amount of time. Now, why Adobe Reader? So the key benefits, I'm pretty sure everyone on this call pretty much has it. If anything from business emails that had attachments, I guarantee one of those attachments that you've had in your career has got a PDF file that you've opened. If not, I guarantee at some point you looked at your cell phone bill, your gas bill, your electricity bill. All those come in the form of PDF files. So everyone has it. And, it's zero cost, it's free. It doesn't get any better than that. And most software today, and by most software, I'm talking about, let's say, tools like Microsoft Office, whether it be Word, Excel, PowerPoint, any one of those, OneNote, as well as outside of the Microsoft brand, we have OpenOffice, for instance, which has, I believe it's called Writer and Calc, all those different packages as well. They all save and export in PDF form. So that's fantastic. We can create our PDF files if we haven't gotten them from our customers or from the source that is expecting us to do this work. And at the end of the day, it keeps the integrity of the original file. you can't mess up or change the original site layout that was provided to you. All you can do is put layers on top in terms of dimensioning, comments, and whatnot. So where do we get it? Well, getadobe.com/reader. And you can download it for anything from Windows OS to a Mac OS to an Android OS. So pretty much anything that you'd probably be looking at using. So some of the basic markup features that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about adding text, adding comments, using the draw tool, add shapes, add stamps. And I'm going to get into more of a live demo at this point. All right, so here's a very, very simple example of a document that you might have received. And, it doesn't have very much detail, but that's okay. We're going to show how to kind of go about this. So within the tool itself, we've got all kinds of functional ribbons here, and we've got some additional ribbons on the side, and we're going to look specifically at the comment ribbon. So when we click on the comment ribbon, we're going to get all these different features that come with the tool. Now, you can do a bunch of things, such as a highlighter, for instance. I'm trying to move my mouse not too quickly in case anyone has bandwidth issues and they don't kind of follow my mouse very well. But if you've got any text on the PDF, you do have the ability to highlight it. So depending on the text, you sometimes have the ability to do certain things and sometimes not, depending on whether the PDF file recognizes it as a text box or as a picture. And in this case, it might look more like a picture. So if we want to add some text, we have the text box here, which now we can put in some text. We can change the size of the box. We've also got a pencil that we can draw things out. We can also change the color of this depending on if we want to highlight something with different colors. We can also change thicknesses. So if we want something that has a lot heavier duty thickness on the line, we can do that as well. We've got different shapes that we can go to. We've got, for instance, lines. So I can draw a line. So if I wanted to highlight this particular line on the box, I can do that. If we want to use particular arrows, we can highlight arrows as well. And all these functions, we can change the level of line thickness if we need to. I'm going to get rid of that box. We can also use squares or create squares. We can also create circles. And don't worry if you've done anything that you want to edit later, you don't have to delete it and put it back in. You can modify shapes as well after you've done them, and you can move them around. To move them around, you wait till you get the 4 arrows, and then you could pretty much move them around anywhere. Now, another option that all these object features have is if you cross over on and highlight the particular object and you get the 4 arrows, you can right-click it and you can go into properties. Now, what that allows you to do is change the color, for instance. You can also, from here, change the line thickness. You can even make it so that it's opaque in nature. So for instance, let's put it at around like 30%, and you'll see that it's almost like a ghostly image. And something else that can be done is you can fill the color with, let's say, some white. And now, oh, that didn't work. You can fill the color with, let's say we'll make it red. So because of opacity, it'll still kind of come through, but you can hide material as well. Some other nice feature that they have on this tool is some standard business tools, for instance, because this is a draft drawing, we're going to draft it up and we're going to mark it as such. Once we're finalized with that, we can mark it approved. So we can get something a little bit more visual, a little bit more authentic or professional in nature. Now, something else that this tool does give you the ability to do is add custom stamps. And the only thing a custom stamp is basically a JPEG or any type of standard picture file that you can import. And what that allows you to do is create your own stamps. So for instance, I can create a flex zone stamp and I can size it up accordingly. Flex zone is a product that Senstar has. And maybe I want to do a gateway. I can put up a gateway and again, size it as appropriately as I want and add that into the drawing, which makes it a lot more clear in terms of what the system is that you're trying to put in. Now, one other aspect that we'll touch on is the measurements and dimensioning features within Adobe. So it's great that you can draw on your diagrams, but the next best thing is adding measurements, and adding measurements that make sense, adding measurements that are accurate or an accurate depiction of what the actual drawing is. So in order to set measurements and dimension features within Adobe, there's really three ways of doing it. There's either using a declared value, which is basically printed on the diagram, or using a ruled line scale, or using a dimensioned object. And once you've got that established, you can do single line measurements, you can do compound line measurements, pretty much anything you want. But it's important to point out that, you know, this step is key, because when I go back to my drawing, actually in this case, I circled the one of the dimensions that are in there. I highlighted one of the scales as well. And we've also got this graphical scale below. So I'll show you how to kind of handle all three of them. So in this particular example, the scale's 1 inch is equal to 22 feet. So what we want to do is go into the tools bar on the side here, and we select measure. Now we've got a new measurement ribbon on the top. Measuring tool. I get my measuring types, and this is just a single distance line. So what I can do now is, with that tool selected, I can right click on the mouse. I can change the scale, ratio, and precision. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it for 1 inch is equal to 22 feet, which is exactly what's represented in the drawing itself. So now, for instance, if I go to measure this particular line, which I already know is 105 feet, I can see that it's just about 105 feet, depending on where I end my line. And when I let go of the button, it locks into that distance, and now I can put the arrow wherever I want, because it might be blocked by certain objects, so I might want to take it away. And when I click it the second time, I get zone 1 and I get the dimension that I'm looking for. Now, the other way is to use a graphic scale. So let me set myself back up to our standard default, which is 1 inch is equal to 1 inch. Now, if I go to my graphical scale and I measure from the 0, I'm trying to do it as accurately as possible. I should be zooming in. It looks like it's about 1.82 inches. So in other words, 1.82 inches is equal to 40 feet. So if I select my measuring tool, I right click, I change my scale or ratio. 1 inch is equal to 1.82, sorry, wrong one. 1.82 inches is equal to 40 feet. Now again, if I measure my known dimension, and something I'll mention, if you know, you could be on a weird angle, which is going to change the results. It's like any Microsoft tool. If you hold the shift, it'll straighten it right up to something that's horizontal or vertical or 45. It'll do all three. So I come in here and I got 105.04, and same thing. I click a second time and I get that dimension in there. So that's our second way of setting up the scale. Now, one thing I'll mention is that doing the scale is equal to 1 inch is equal to 22 feet, or this graphic scale at the bottom, that implies two things. When I print off this piece of paper, if I measure 1 inch on the page, I'm going to measure 1 inch on the screen itself. That has to correlate. In other words, if I was to take a screen capture of this particular screen and paste it onto a PDF and made it half the size, well, that scale is now changed by half. So I need to make sure it's a 1-for-1 ratio. If not, it's not going to work. The only time it is going to work is if I use this dimensioned object. If I use the dimensioned object scale, it doesn't matter how zoomed in or how zoomed out the image is. because the dimension is 105 feet from here to here, no matter how much I've zoomed, which in this case, I've got 4.77 inches is equal to 105 feet. So I'll go into my measurement, I'll right click, change scale, same as everything. And now I'm going to put in 4.77 inches is equal to 105 feet. So now let's measure that same distance. And we've got essentially 105 feet. Again, the more accurate way to do it would be to zoom right in. I just didn't want to kind of mess up with everyone's bandwidth with the screen change. But if you zoomed right in so that you maximize that 105 inches from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen, I can get a much more accurate scaling if I go about it that way. I'm going to now show you kind of a more accurate representation of what it is we're trying to do. So let's get into it. Let's kind of start drawing it up and see what we can do. And we're just going to apply everything that we just learned from the last page. So we're going to do some comments, put in, let's say, front gate.
Hi, Todd.
There we go.
We have one question come in that I thought maybe you could just answer here on the fly. What version of Adobe Reader are you using?
So I'm using Adobe Acrobat Reader DC. In terms of the version number, they've pretty much all been the same for years now. They, of course, do have updates like all software, but they all have the same basic features. But I would suggest that whenever somebody's going to be using it for this, just make sure you have the most up-to-date version. And so now we've got a front gate here. Hopefully that answers the question. We have a west gate here. And again, we can change the color on this if we want to by hitting properties. And if you want to go change a particular color, you just hit the border color and change it in that way. And again, you can move it around if you need to position things a little bit more accurately. So we've added that in. We'll add in some call-out boxes, which are sometimes nice to have because I was told when I was sent this particular file that I have access to power and network at this point. And I was also told that if needed, I also have power and network access. So I'm just kind of filling up the data that I have with any information that was provided to me. Now I can also change properties in terms of, I might want to have something like a diamond call out instead of the arrow. We maybe want to leave arrows to dimensioning and maybe diamonds to certain positioning. So we've got that in there. And now I can see that the scale here is 1 inch is equal to 105 feet. Actually, that should say 1 inch, not 1 foot. So what that means is that I can set up my scale, assuming that this page is accurately represented. So in other words, I got the actual file from the CAD guy who made sure that the scaling was proper. Otherwise, I would need some object that was dimensioned in here, which isn't too hard to get. So I'm going to go to my measurement tool, and I'm going to click on measuring. I'm going to right-click, change my scale. Now, bear in mind, I set my scale up for the previous page, so this is page dependent. Or should I say that the scale that I set up is for the whole document. So if scale changes from page 1 to page 2 to page 3, which quite often does happen, every time you switch to the next page, you do have to change that scale. So in this case, 1 inch is equal to 105 feet. There, I've already got it in. But bear in mind, when I do change that scale, the numbers from the previous page don't change unless I redraw them. So for instance, right now, if I redraw that same, what should be 105 feet, it's now 499 feet because instead of 4.77 inches equals 105 feet, it's now set for 1 inch is equal to 105 feet. So just be cognizant of that. So now what we can do is we can go into the measuring tool. We can do a standard measurement. We can go from this particular area and we can position it where we want. We can go from this distance here to here, and we can set that up where we want. Now, one thing to point out, you notice that we have zone 1 and we have zone 1 on this number as well. So what I'm able to do is, if I right-click this particular label, I can now change that zone 1 indicator, and I can change it to zone 2, depending on how you're dividing up your zones. And we can keep drawing across, and we can go from this particular distance to here, and we have 519 feet. We can go from this distance to this distance. Now I'm just kind of doing a little bit of a hack-up job because I'm trying to make sure we get this in a reasonable amount of time. So you can set this up as accurately or inaccurately as you like, depending on what the accurate level of accuracy that you require to do this particular exercise. So we've got here. So that's all the dimensioning that I'll be doing. Now I might want to look at the entire perimeter or split up the perimeter in a certain way. So I'm going to do a compound measurement in this case. So I figure I'm probably going to set up one system, let's say from here to this corner, which is 980 feet. You can kind of see it at the bottom there on my cursor. So if I click it, the one thing you lose when you do a compound measurement is you lose the number. That 900 and some feet disappears. But if you hover your mouse or select it, you'll see that this message window will pop up and give you that number. So what I'm going to do in this case, because I am doing something different, I'm going to go to the measurement preferences. No, sorry, I'm going to go to the properties. And I'm going to change the color to blue because this is more of a perimeter. I'm going to fatten it up a little bit, and I'm going to get rid of the, actually I'll keep the arrows just for fun. And now what I'm going to do is do another compound measurement, and I'm going to measure it from this point . Again, I'm doing this really quickly. You probably want to do it more accurately by zooming in when you're doing it for real. Up to this point, and I double click on the end, and now I'm finished. So now what I can do is select it, and let's change that color to something that is going to differentiate it from the other one. So let's go to maybe let's see what works good. This color worked great. And open, we'll thicken it up similar to the other one. So now I've got representation of two sides. We've got, let's say, this particular side, and we've got this. Now, bear in mind, when you do this, you can select that area, and in case you didn't quite put the arrows where you wanted, you can modify it. Same thing with the blue one here. I can select the blue. I can hover right above that last dot, and I can move it over. Oh, I moved over the wrong one. Something else we'll add in is we'll add in some of those comments like we stated before, where we can put in a stamp. And I'm going to use a Senstar stamp. We're going to go with an LM100 design where we can basically put along the blue line with a separation of about 20 feet per luminaire. We can set that one up, and it looks like it's going to be about 77 luminaires that fit across that perimeter section. And the one that's kind of the darker red, that's going to fit about 57 luminaires. So I'm going to put two gateways, and a gateway is for up to 100 luminaires. So I'm going to put one where we have network and power, which is located right here. And I can add in the other stamp the same way, or I can just hit Control-C and Control-V, which will copy my selected item, and I'll put that one here as well. So now I know I have representation of where my two gateways will be. One gateway will drive the blue luminaires, and the other gateway will drive the dark red luminaires. One thing I do notice is that I do have 2,000 feet of perimeter. So what I can do if I wanted, depending on the customer situation. This area, the dark red, is pretty much well illuminated from a parking lot and a road perspective. So I'm probably going to get less intrusion attempts on that end. I may want to go with a lower cost option, which might be Flex Zone. So what I can do is I can, instead of putting in an LM100 system in this particular location, I can delete that particular one, and I can go in with a Flex Zone system, which is a copper cable type of perimeter security system. So I can put that one here, and I can monitor this particular portion of the perimeter with something that's much lower cost because I'm not as worried about that end. And one thing about Flex Zone is it does do up to 2,000 feet per processor. So just for fun, I can also put a cable along this end with the luminaires. And while the luminaires will add a nice deterrent factor, I've got a second level of security just in case, you know, something would happen that one would fail or be out of commission. The Flex Zone system will double up on that. So if you're looking for a multi-layer approach, this is a great way of doing it. So in the end, we're pretty much done here. We've got we've approved that design, and something that'll be interesting for you to kind of be aware of is I can take, for instance, a diagram like this. I can use some sort of screen capture tool, and I can capture that screen and copy it, and then within the PDF, I can Control V or paste it. And now I can size it. And maybe this might be a block diagram or something that's more, that offers more explanation of what exactly I'm doing. So here we see we've got a fence, we've got some luminaires that are located at every second post. We've got a gateway that's hooked into a keypad, some sort of enunciator, maybe even some security cameras, and it's all networked together. So I've got that now shown on the screen, which is going to be much more, offer much more description on what it is I'm trying to do. And whoever looks at this document will see that. So that's essentially it from an Adobe Acrobat Reader perspective in terms of what it is I'm able to kind of put in there and what I can show. Now, something that you don't always get is, let's say, a scale number like we've shown below here, or some sort of object scale that is already represented on the diagram. Sometimes what we're given is a document like this, and ignore these particular dimensioning. Let's assume that there's no dimensioning on this particular object. What we can do in order to dimension this particular thing is we'll kind of zoom into this area. And so I'm going to go to my measurement tool, and I'm going to change the scale. 1 inch is back to 1 inch. And I'm going to measure this door opening. And this door opening on the screen, you can see it's 0.11 inches. So typical doorways are 3 feet. If I go to my measurement tool, I go to my change scale, 1 inch, actually it's 0.11 inches is equal to 3 feet. Hit OK. Now let's zoom out. And let's see if that works out to the dimensions that are actually on there. Again, this is assuming that we don't have dimensions on here and you're trying to make something up that's reasonably accurate. So we can see that this one works out to 92 feet, 0.39. If you're doing something that's kind of rough in scale and you just want to get some sort of rough estimate, this works out perfectly. You can get by without requiring that software. So in summary, we kind of looked at pros and cons using CAD software. We looked at why we want to use Adobe because it's free, of course, and where, of course, we want to get it. And then all kinds of basic marking up features that we have the ability to do with the Adobe Acrobat Reader, as well as how to go about measuring and dimensioning the document that you have. And then, of course, using stamps and copy-pasting images.
That was a great job. Lots of good information there on how to use a tool that pretty much everybody has, but we don't necessarily know how to fully exploit the full features. So that's great. One of the things in the questions was getting the stamps that you've used.
Right.
And maybe you can talk about what format they are in. How does one get them and put them in place, maybe.
Right. So I assume you still see my screen here. If we go to stamps and we go to custom stamps, we create and browse. So what you're going to see is it's looking for a PDF file. So in this case, in this particular directory, I've got some PDF files that are already in there. And let's just have a quick look at those PDF files directly. Pictures. So here's a PDF file of a gateway. So if I open it, it's going to open in, actually I'll have to cancel this right now and cancel that. So this is just a PDF file of something that looks like this. So if I go into my stamps, again, go to comment, stamps, custom stamps, create, browse. I take my gateway stamp or PDF file and I double click it and hit OK. And that's pretty much it. I can give it a new, I can put it in the Senstar folder. I can call it, maybe I'll give it a different name, LM100 Gateway. Okay. Now, when I want to add this particular stamp, I go to Senstar. Now I have another one. I have this one, which is called LM100 Gateway. So now I can put that in. I can shrink it up to whatever appropriate size and add it to my drawing.